Hello, welcome to CLC News. Today is the 24th of January 2021. As a follow-up to the videos that were released yesterday, today we're actually going to discuss a case that we've recently taken on for a family who are all registered under common law. We had a mother and father and 5 children. The children initially ranged from the ages, I think it was from 4 to 15. I think now they may be 5 to 15. But the story began probably about 7-8 months ago. Now, what had happened is the family concerned that were staying on a sort of steading type property. They were just out of the city and stayed in it was like a farm. They had a track, obviously a road leading to the farmhouse. They'd been living on the land for quite a number of years, so renting the property. They had various animals and they were living on organic food and the like. They also, with the children, had been homeschooling them for a number of years, and by all accounts, the children are all polite, well-mannered, well brought up, and don't have a problem. The eldest 3 children did have a registration with their birth certificate with the state, but when the parents had realised what was going on, they hadn't registered the 2 youngest children with the state. And what had happened, they recently, about a year ago, they then decided to register the whole family under common law and they deal with the fictitious names as well. Now, while the family lived there, have done for a number of years, and everything had been okay, they happened to have a dispute with a neighbour in relation to the land and an access road. Not a great issue, but it resulted in the police being aware that there was a dispute between the parties. Now, what had happened is, for some reason, they were aware that there was children on the premises, and the social services then got involved. Now, in Scotland, they call the social services, or in relation to this, a children's reporter. So the children's reporter was allocated to deal with this and came to the property one day with police in attendance. Now, they were aware that the children weren't going to school and that they had no birth certificate for a couple of children. So they came with the police to try and find out about the children and possibly to take them away. Now, when they arrived at the property, the husband went to the door to deal with this issue and would not allow them entry, but on discussing with police, I think it was a police sergeant possibly at the door, they had to hit the social services, or the children's report had expressed concerns about the children. So there was a discussion about the children and the fact that they were living at home, they were homeschooled and they didn't go to the state school. But the police sergeant had wanted to make sure that the children were okay and were safe. Well, obviously they'd be safe, they're at home. Now, there was not an issue, but the father had taken the 3 children, the eldest 3 children, and asked them to come to the door. So they had saw that the children were well behaved, they were looked after, there was no problems with them and everything was fine, and they spoke to them. The police sergeant then had asked to see the 2 youngest children, but it was pointed out that the 2 youngest children did not have a statutory birth certificate, in which case the state had no claim on them. Now, at which point the sergeant then smiled wryly because he knew what the situation was, and then decided there was no need to see the 2 younger children. So they left it at that and explained that everything, as far as he was concerned, there was no issues, and that he was prepared just to leave matters as they were. However, he did point out that at some point in the future, they may be back, or the children's reporter may come back again later on. Now, what happened probably a couple of months later, again, there was a dispute with the neighbours, just a minor scuffle and issue. Now, what had happened is the police became involved again, but the children's reporter, being aware that there was an issue with the house and the children, they decided to appear at the same time. Now, what had happened during the dispute, the police had decided to remove the father. So the police had taken away the father and decided to obviously arrest him. But when they took the father away, the children's reporter then moved in and removed all 5 children and left the mother at home on her own. Now, first of all, this is unlawful. It's kidnapping, and to be quite honest, they had no grounds to remove the father anyway. Now, the father has obviously been released. He said, but what had happened is they've been using the fact that the father was off the premises to take the children. So, with the father being inside and obviously walked away, and the mother obviously in a state because her children had been removed and so unable to deal with this, had never been to court before, it was decided obviously we needed to try and do something. So, having spoken to the Common Law Court and a number of people, we had a chat about what to do, and it was suggested that the best route for them would be for them to surrender the ownership of the legal title to someone at the Common Law Court. So it was agreed that I would take ownership of the legal fictions for the children. I therefore made the relevant application with the Common Law Court, submitting obviously the application for the children, bearing in mind that the parents had consented to this, and again, given the consent, I was then given ownership of the legal titles. So effectively what we have is we have 5 children, all registered under common law, and we have 5 fictitious names, the legal entities. The legal entities are actually owned by myself. So I've taken the legal entities. Now, I do not stay anywhere near these individuals, bearing in mind the children were always also removed, but I have these legal fictions, dead entities, pieces of paper. So what did happen? Shortly after the children were removed, the children's reporter had went to the court, the statutory courts, places of business. They're used for theft and kidnapping. But what they did is they went to this court, they then presented the information, and the judge then allocated an order for each child, removing the child in doing so. Now, what they've seemed to miss here is that they've actually bound the children into slavery. This is something that's done in every court, every day of the week, and it's something that the government do regularly. Now, what we'd like to point out that, as well as the declaration for the Common Law Court, that confirms that when everyone's born, regardless of where they are in the world, they are born sovereign and free. In Scotland, we actually had the added incentive because, in addition to the declaration for the Common Law Court, we had in 1320 the Declaration of Arbroath. Now, the Declaration of Arbroath is one of the founding documents in the world. It's used to establish the position of the people in Scotland at the time, and confirming that anyone born in Scotland is born sovereign, free, and a living man. So therefore, we've already established that everyone's free in this country. But as soon as they actually went to court, they had no authority over a child, a living child, because the courts that they have, statutory courts, place of business, they can only deal with legal fictions because they are commercial bodies themselves. They cannot deal with living men, women, or children. They can only deal with the fictions. So therefore, when they've dealt with a fiction, they've issued 5 orders for 5 legal fictions. Now, if we go back to the explanation I gave earlier on, what we have is 5 children, all registered under common law. So they exist as living individuals. The judge, well, it's a sheriff in Scotland, we call them, the sheriff had actually issued 5 orders to remove the legal titles. But what the children's reporter did is they used that to kidnap and unlawfully detain 5 children, as these legal fictions have nothing to do with the children. They're not attached to the children. They're actually mine. They're my personal property. I own them. I have a valid ownership document from the Common Law Court confirming that I own them. Now, this fact has already been established previously by myself in a court, whereby I confirmed ownership of my own fiction, and the judge and the prosecutor at the time were given the opportunity to challenge this. They refused to do so, so it was established in court as a fact in law that I had ownership of the fiction. Now again, I have ownership of these 5 fictions, but what happened is the children's reporter, having obtained this through this commercial court, got the decision and decided then to target 5 children. So effectively, what they've done is they've applied for an order against 5 fictions. They've then just taken that and decided to go to the house. Well, they'd already been to the house, but they went to the house, grabbed 5 children and kidnapped them. To back that up, they've then tried to get an order, but they've had an order allocated against the fictions. But as we've said just now, the fictions, the legal fictions of titles, are not attached to the children. They're mine, and I have confirmation of ownership. So therefore, what they've done is a criminal offence, and with that, it's criminal coercion, because they're attaching a title to you. It's a slave name, and they're breaching the Slavery Act. Now, everyone had thought slavery was abolished hundreds of years ago. No, it wasn't. It was not abolished. They were clever. What they did is they changed the goalposts. Instead of obviously having a small minority of people who were slaves, they then decided it was no longer acceptable to have slaves, so they stated they were going to free the slaves, but then all the people together would stand in a new community. They would stand as a citizen, and as a citizen they would have privileges. Now, the privileges they give you, you're entitled to anyway, because at birth you have inherent birthrights. But because you're now a citizen and you've signed up to their corporation, you then play by their rules. If you then want one of your inherent rights from birth, you now can no longer have that unless you go through the existing governments or the existing statutory system, and only then when you pay the appropriate fee or you've complied with the appropriate rules will then they allow you to have these privileges. So the whole thing is slavery. It's all about deception. They've led people to believe they're not slaves, but they've actually hidden it through the use of the legal fiction. So if we come back to the case now, what we'll do is look at the children. Basically what had happened is I lodged a case against the children's reporter, the manager in charge. Now, the manager in charge was someone called Lynn Hobbs, so I took out a claim against her. Now, the claim in itself was only for damages. Now, she had stolen my property, which is the legal titles. However, in doing so, people have suffered harm, loss and injury, and myself. So I've put in a claim for each title that I'd lost. Also, in the paperwork, I was made aware that using my legal title, they had kidnapped children. So it was pointed out that these children must be returned immediately as well. So I went to the courts, and I also went to the police to report this. Unfortunately, the police weren't sure what to do, and they did actually take a report from me. And despite passing this on to the Chief Constable as well in Scotland, the Chief Constable has failed to respond. Now, the Chief Constable's office was contacted, I think it was after a week of their recorded delivery letter going in. We couldn't get them, they wouldn't speak to us. However, they gave his personal contact email and says that he wouldn't personally answer, but he had an assistant, and that all emails sent to this address would be responded to. So we sent in the appropriate email, and yet again, the Chief Constable has not responded, or his office. This had went in about 3 months ago, and there has been no response at all. So therefore, you have cases of criminal coercion, slavery, kidnapping, abuse. This is all by the state, and the police couldn't care less about it. They've done nothing. But again, as if we look at the police is a registered corporation. They're not there for justice, they are there for profit, and they work with the state. So that doesn't surprise us. The paperwork was submitted to the court, and the courts are reluctant, obviously, to take this paperwork, surprisingly. They don't know what to do with it, but because it's been highlighted that what they've actually done is kidnapping, they then have to decide what they're going to do. Now, if they had released all the children immediately on day one, it would have been clear-cut that what we had done was correct, we were right, and obviously we can use this for every child. So they were never going to allow that. So what they decided to do is think about it. So they held on to the children. They then started forcibly threatening the parents with, obviously, this is not seeing the children again. They then, believe it or not, targeted the children and obviously got them to believe that the parents didn't want them. A couple of the children were being abused while they were in care as well. And I should also point out that although the children had also always been brought up together, they've never been parted. When the children's reporter did take them away, they were all split up individually and moved to a different family. But they had obviously suffered there, and there are issues of abuse as well. But they've done that with the children. Now, when this was the case, the state, being concerned, decided that they wanted to try and speak to the parents. So eventually, despite all the threats as well, they went to the parents and said, right, what we're going to do is we'll consider releasing the children because of the paperwork that's went in and because of the complaints were made. So it was thought through the children's reporter that they may consider releasing the two eldest children. So they went on, but again, the children were suffering. There was various problems, but I think it was approximately the end of November, maybe beginning of December, around about then, the two eldest children were released into the care of the mother. Now, I think obviously they allowed a couple of home visits, but they were allowed home. Now, when they returned, the children's reporter had then stated, depending on how you get on, what we will do is we will have a look at the youngest children and consider possibly releasing them as well so they can return home. It was left a couple of weeks over the Christmas period, and then at the beginning of the year there was a hearing. But on the, I think it was the 15th of January, which is 9 days ago, I received a call to confirm that all children were returned home. So the mother now has the children. However, they've obviously targeted the father, and they're not allowing the father home, and they're not allowing the father any contact with the children. Now, this is obviously an issue that we're going to address. The father was obviously charged with a serious issue. However, I said now that the children have been released, they've dropped the charge substantially. So it's a minor charge now that they have him on. But again, he shouldn't have been charged in the first place. This was done to obtain the children. So we're assisting the father just now. However, in relation to the children, they are all at home with the mother now. So again, it works. Now, not being stupid or trying to be clever, what we'll do is we'll look at the evidence here. Now, as you're looking at this just now, you're obviously concerned and interested about these issues. So what I will say to you just now is, do you believe that you are reasonably minded and a man or woman? Now, the basis for their so-called court of justice, which is so-called, the basis they use is you have to view, this is the position from a reasonably minded man or woman. So I'm taking it that you are personally a reasonably minded man or woman. So I'm going to put the information before you. They had actually taken away 5 children unlawfully. They had no authority to do so. They'd taken them away, and they then applied for a court order. They obtained a court order using criminal coercion, which is slavery, but attaching a slave name. They broke up the children, they put them to 5 different care homes, and they had no intention at all of releasing the children. The carers who had the children were all harassing the children, telling them that they were unwanted, telling them that their parents didn't want to see them. They were passing on various stories about what happened to try and get them on side, and they were refusing to speak to the parents. When the paperwork had been submitted by myself to the court and they realised what was going on, they have looked at it and realised that they do not have a valid order. For them to withdraw or to take children or to have children, they have to have a valid order. They have no valid order because the order they have is for the fictitious name. I have ownership of the fictitious name, and the fictitious name is not attached to the child. So therefore, they've taken children away using fraudulent documents and criminal coercion, and they've obviously got the court and the police and the children's reporter to assist. So it is child trafficking. Now they've done that and they have no way to win this argument. They've panicked, but instead of obviously releasing the children, they've tried to cover up. Now I believe that what they've done is said, we need to get this sorted, so they've returned the children. All children are at home now. Now, this is my understanding, because if we look at the situation with children that are removed by the state, they're virtually never returned home, especially after a period of about 7 months. especially after what they've said about the parents and the fact they've tried to arrest one of the parents as well. Under no circumstances that I'm aware of has this happened before, and all 5 children are home. Now, the state, to be fair, if you were to ask them, they will probably say, well, we are concerned about the children. Well, first of all, why are they concerned? Because they don't have a birth certificate, because they stay at home and they're homeschooled, because they don't obviously interact with the state. Well, they're concerned, but that's no reason for concern. So they then decide that they want to remove the children, but they don't have an order. So they then apply for a fraudulent order using a slave name, which is a legal fiction, and then decide to attach it to a child to steal them, kidnap them, and unlawfully detain them. Now, that being the case because they're now caught out, and because the children's reporter is facing a huge case for damages for the removal of these children and for the harm done and the theft of my property, they've decided they won't deal with it. So they've returned the children. But as we said just now, the social services will say, or the children's reporter will say they've done nothing wrong. They were concerned about the children. Well, they never saw the children. This is for months or years. This is until this kicked off recently. They've then said that they have to remove the children. Well, they don't. They could have actually spoken to the parents and dealt with the parents if there was an issue. That didn't happen. They actually stole them. They kidnapped them. He says, and also, when they've then been hot with these papers, they then realise there's a problem. But realising the position they're in, they could not keep the children. The state will say that they have been working with the parents, they've removed the children out of concern, they've worked with the parents, which they weren't doing, and they've decided to release 2. Well, I would put it to you, they've had to release them because they were kidnapping. And having released the 2, they were then guaranteed that they had to release the rest because they've already clarified that the mother is fit to look after them. So there's no way that it should be removed in the first place. But they then have returned the 3. But if you ask them why they've been returned, they will probably say because they've been working with the mother and they're now confident that she can look after the children, and they'll probably say that they're under continual assessment, which is it's a lame, it's an excuse, and it's something that doesn't happen again. How many children are returned after the state have taken them? I firmly believe that the common law court documentation has done this. I firmly believe that it's kidnapping. The ownership of the legal fiction confirms that, and they are running for cover and they're trying to back up what they've done and protect themselves. What I will confirm is, although the children have been returned, and that was one requirement, the case that I have lodged is for damages for the theft of my property, the theft of my property being the legal fictions. So therefore, it says there is a court case in just now. I'm going through the courts and there is substantial damages for this. I think it's approximately just over around about $500,000 mark for this. I'm proceeding with the case because I have suffered damages. And again, this is a put in a claim. They will have to dispute this and they will have to challenge this and fight my claim in court. So it's an interesting story. It's something that I wanted to share with you, and it's obviously good from the position of the common law court. I'll let you make up your own minds. It is interesting, but remember, when we're dealing with the state just now, we're not dealing with courts as we know them, or we like to think we have. We're dealing with a corporation. It's run for profit. We're dealing with police, which is a registered company. And again, they're not there to protect you. They're there for profit. They perform as police officers, not constables. We also have children's reporters, which are there on the state to take children away. And again, it's monetized. So they're doing that as well. How many times do we hear about children being removed from parents at these closed court meetings behind closed doors? Nobody gets in. The public doesn't get access. They use the fact that they're children to keep people out, during which time they're actually stealing children. Well, this time we've actually reversed it. We have the 5 children at home. It's been done using common law court. I believe that men and women are reasonably minded, and I believe that having listened to this information, you would actually agree with what we've just said. So we have it here, 5 children have been returned home, and again, it's another success for the common law court. This can be used for additional people. It can be used in different countries. and it is a way to take them on. It says if the legal fiction is not attached to the child, they cannot remove a child. It would be kidnapping. They can only do so if they have a valid order, and it was established in this case that they had no valid order, because the valid order confirmed the removal of a fiction. The fiction is literally a piece of paper owned by me, and it's not attached to the child. As soon as they put a hand on the child to remove them, it's assault, it's criminal coercion, it's kidnapping, it's slavery, and it's child trafficking. This is what the state are doing, and this is what they're accountable for. So hopefully you've enjoyed this information. Please, as it's an important issue, if you can share this information far and wide, please, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. And again, tomorrow, we're going to put up another video tomorrow. We have another 7 or so to come out, maybe 8. There are many issues that we've been dealing with in the last few months. This is why we've been busy. But we'll get up this information on a daily basis. I thought you would like this one. Goodbye for now, and hopefully you will join us again tomorrow. Goodbye.